The screen fades in, and there's a low growl echoing through a dimly lit shelter. Meet Shadow, a hybrid bobcat with eyes that pierce through the gloom, carrying a story heavier than her sleek, spotted frame. She's been bounced around 5 different homes, each one spitting her out with the same harsh labels: untrainable, dangerous. This animal tore through furniture like it was paper, nipped at kids, and sent other cats scurrying in fear. Her wild heart seemed too much for anyone to handle. Now she's one day away from a one-way ticket to a zoo, a place where her spirit might fade behind bars forever. The clock's ticking and hope's running thin, but something's about to shift. Someone's about to see past the chaos and into the soul of this misunderstood creature. What could possibly change the fate of a bobcat nobody wanted? Stick around, because this rescue tale's got a twist you won't see coming. The shelter was quiet that afternoon, save for the soft clinks of metal cages and the occasional shuffle of paws. Shadow, the hybrid bobcat, sat in the corner of her enclosure, her amber eyes glinting with a mix of defiance and exhaustion. Her story was one of rejection. 5 homes, 5 failures, each one branding her as too wild, too much trouble. But then Daniel walked in. My husband, with his calm demeanor and knack for seeing the good in the toughest cases, wasn't fazed by the warnings taped to her cage. Caution, aggressive. He didn't see a problem animal, he saw a creature with a past, one that deserved a chance at a real rescue. Daniel knelt down, his knees crunching against the cold concrete floor. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm. Shadow's ears twitched, her body tense, ready to pounce. Or so I thought. He moved slowly, deliberately, his hand inching toward the bars. I held my breath, half expecting her to hiss or swipe. But something extraordinary happened. Shadow didn't lunge. She didn't growl. Instead, her head tilted, those fierce eyes softening with a flicker of curiosity. It was like she was sizing him up, not as a threat, but as someone new, someone different. Daniel's voice was low, almost a whisper as he spoke to her, words I couldn't quite catch, but that carried a warmth that seemed to melt the space between them. Then, in a moment that felt like it stretched forever, Shadow leaned forward. Her rough, spotted nose brushed against his outstretched fingers, gentle as a breeze. It wasn't just contact. It was connection. I stood there, jaw practically on the floor, watching this so-called dangerous bobcat show a side no one else had seen. Daniel turned to me, his eyes bright with something like hope, maybe even a little mischief. "She's not what they think," he said, his voice steady but alive with conviction. "She just needs someone to believe in her." I wasn't so sure. The shelter staff hovered nearby, rattling off her rap sheet, biting kids, shredding couches, terrorizing other cats. They warned us we'd be crazy to take her. But that moment, that single touch, had flipped a switch in Daniel. He was all in, ready to rewrite her story. We signed the papers that day, against every ounce of common sense. Driving home, Shadow curled up in her carrier, her breathing steady but her eyes still watchful. I couldn't shake the feeling we were inviting chaos into our lives. Daniel, though, was already planning her space, talking about how we'd make it work. I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. Could one moment of trust really outweigh all the warnings? As we pulled into our driveway, I glanced at Shadow, her silhouette sharp against the fading light. She was ours now, for better or worse. But what would happen when we brought this wild creature into our home, with our own cat Misty waiting inside? The real test was just beginning, and I wasn't sure we were ready for it. Bringing Shadow home felt like inviting a tornado into our lives. The first few days were a whirlwind of chaos, and I don't mean that lightly. This wasn't just some housecat adjusting to a new litter box. Shadow was a hybrid bobcat, a wild animal with a story carved from rejection and survival. Her amber eyes tracked every move in our living room, like she was mapping out a battlefield. Daniel, ever the optimist, kept saying, "She just needs time." But I wasn't so sure. Our cozy home, once a haven for me and our 10-year-old tabby, Misty, was starting to feel like a testing ground for this rescue mission we'd signed up for. It started small: clawed curtains, a toppled lamp, scratches on the coffee table that looked like a modern art disaster. Shadow moved like she owned the place, leaping onto counters and tearing through anything in her path. I'd catch her staring out the window, her tail flicking as if she was plotting her next move. Daniel laughed it off, calling her spirited, but I was fraying at the edges. Misty, our sweet, grey-whiskered cat, wasn't faring much better. She'd taken to hiding under the couch, her green eyes wide with fear every time Shadow prowled by. I tried to stay patient, reminding myself this was a rescue, not a fairy tale. But then things took a darker turn. One evening, I heard a yowl that stopped my heart. I rushed into the kitchen to find Shadow pinning Misty against the wall, her teeth bared, a low growl rumbling from her throat. Misty's fur was puffed up, a gash on her side trickling blood. I screamed, scooping Misty up and cradling her, like a child. My hands shook as I cleaned her wound, tears blurring my vision. This wasn't just a mess. It was a disaster. "She's got to go," I told Daniel, my voice cracking. "She's dangerous, just like they said." The shelter's warnings echoed in my head: untrainable, a risk to other animals. I felt like we'd failed, like Shadow's story was too broken to rewrite. Daniel, though, didn't budge. He sat on the floor, watching Shadow pace in the corner, her ears flat against her head. "She's not mean," he said softly, almost to himself. "She's scared. Something's got her wired like this." I wanted to argue, to demand we call the shelter right then and there. But the way he looked at her, calm, steady, like he could see past the chaos, made me pause. He wasn't giving up on this animal, not yet. "Give me a little more time," he pleaded, his eyes meeting mine. "I think there's more to her story we don't know." I agreed, but my heart wasn't in it. As I bandaged Misty's wound, I couldn't shake the fear that we'd made a terrible mistake. Shadow wasn't just adjusting, she was disrupting everything. Each night I'd lie awake, listening for another fight, wondering if we'd bitten off more than we could chew. Daniel spent hours sitting near Shadow, not pushing, just being there. I didn't understand it, but something in his quiet persistence hinted at a deeper truth about her. What was it about this Bobcat that he saw, that I was missing? And what would it take to make this house a home for all of us? The days after Misty's injury were tense, like walking on eggshells in our own home. Shadow's presence felt like a storm cloud, unpredictable and heavy. I kept my distance, still reeling from the chaos, but Daniel was relentless in his belief that this animal could be more than her past. He'd sit cross-legged on the floor, just watching her, as if piecing together the fragments of her story. Turns out, he was onto something. One evening, he found an old report tucked in Shadow's adoption papers, a gut punch of a revelation. Shadow had spent her first 2 years in an illegal breeding facility, locked in a cage so small she could barely turn around. She'd been let out only to perform for gawking visitors, prodded and pushed until her spirit was more scar than spark. This wasn't just a bobcat with an attitude, this was a creature carrying a lifetime of trauma. Daniel didn't waste time. He started transforming our home, removing anything that screamed cage. The wire pet crate we used for storage, gone. The metal drying rack, out the door. Even the decorative bird cage on the mantel was rehomed to a neighbor. "She needs to feel free," he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. I wasn't sure it'd make a difference, But I couldn't argue with the fire in his eyes. This rescue wasn't just about giving Shadow a home. It was about giving her a chance to heal. The changes started small, but felt huge. Shadow's pacing slowed, her eyes less frantic. Then came the storms. One night, thunder rolled in, loud enough to rattle the windows. Shadow froze, her body trembling, and then bolted under the couch, her breathing ragged. It was the first time I saw her not as a threat, but as a terrified animal. Daniel knelt nearby, not reaching for her, just talking in that low, soothing tone of his. "You're okay, girl. You're safe." I watched, half expecting her to lash out, but she didn't. Instead, she inched closer, her nose brushing his knee, seeking comfort. My heart caught in my throat. This wasn't the dangerous bobcat everyone warned us about. This was a creature learning to trust. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Shadow's panic attacks came and went, especially when the skies darkened. But each time she'd seek us out instead of hiding or snapping. One afternoon, I was folding laundry when she padded over, her steps hesitant. I froze, bracing for trouble, but she just sat there, staring up at me with those amber eyes. Then, slowly, she nudged my hand, with her head. My breath hitched. It was the first time she'd reached out to me, not Daniel. I scratched behind her ears, feeling the rough warmth of her fur, and for a moment, the weight of doubt lifted. Maybe her story could change. Daniel and I started working as a team, learning her cues, giving her space when she needed it. Misty, still wary, began to creep out from her hiding spots, watching Shadow from a distance. The house felt less like a war zone, but we weren't out of the woods yet. Could Shadow really let go of her past? And could Misty and even I find a way to share our home with this wild soul? Something was shifting, but the real test of trust was still ahead. The air in our home was starting to feel lighter, like the calm after a long storm. Shadow, our once wild bobcat, was no longer the untamed force that had torn through our lives. Her story of rescue was unfolding in ways I never imagined, but we weren't quite a family yet. Daniel's quiet patience had cracked open a door to trust, and I was beginning to see glimmers of the animal he believed in. Still, Misty, our gentle tabby, kept her distance, her green eyes wary whenever Shadow prowled nearby. I wondered if we'd ever bridge that gap, if this house could hold all of us without breaking. Little by little, Shadow surprised us. One morning, I caught her watching Misty from across the room. Not with the predatory stare of before, but with a soft curiosity. Misty, perched on her favorite windowsill, didn't bolt. Instead, she flicked her tail, almost daring Shadow to come closer. Then, in a moment that felt like a small miracle, Shadow padded over and with the lightest touch, licked Misty's ear. My jaw dropped. It wasn't just a truce. It was an olive branch, a tentative step toward peace. Misty froze, then relaxed, her eyes half closing as if to say, "Okay, maybe you're not so bad." Daniel shot me a grin from the couch, his "I told you so," unspoken but loud as ever. Shadow's walls were coming down, and not just with Misty. One evening I was sprawled on the couch, exhausted from a long day, when I felt a weight settle beside me. I glanced down to see Shadow, her skipped, her massive head resting in my lap. My heart stopped. This wasn't the cautious nudge from before. This was full surrender, her amber eyes half closed, her breathing slow and steady. I ran my fingers through her coarse fur, feeling the warmth of her trust. Tears pricked my eyes. This animal, labeled untamable, was choosing me, choosing us. Daniel watched from the doorway, his smile soft but triumphant. No words were needed. We both felt the shift. It wasn't perfect overnight. Shadow still had moments of panic, especially during loud storms, but she'd curl up between us now, seeking safety. Misty began to join her, the two animals sharing sunny spots on the rug like old friends. The house, once a battleground, was becoming a home. Daniel and I learned to read Shadow's moods, to give her space when her past crept up, and to celebrate her quiet victories. Her story wasn't about taming a wild creature. It was about showing her she was safe, loved, and understood. But as I sat there stroking Shadow's fur, I couldn't help but wonder what this journey meant beyond our walls. Healing a creature like Shadow took more than patience. It took empathy, a willingness to see past the scars. How many other animals, or even people, were out there, misunderstood and waiting for someone to believe in them? Thought lingered, stirring something deep as Shadow's soft purrs filled the quiet room. As the camera pans across our living room, Shadow sprawled out on the rug, her spotted fur catching the golden light of the afternoon. Misty's curled up nearby, her soft purrs blending with Shadow's, a harmony we never thought possible. This journey, this wild, messy, beautiful rescue story, taught us something profound. Healing doesn't come from forcing change, but from offering safety, patience, and a whole lot of heart. Shadow wasn't just an animal we brought home. She was a mirror, showing us what trust and empathy can do, even for the most broken souls. Think about it. What's a moment in your life where patience turned things around? Have you ever seen someone or something transform when given a real chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. And if this tale of an untrainable bobcat finding her place moved you, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. There's so many more stories like this waiting to tug at your heartstrings. Don't miss out. Join us for the next one.